Coming up, an American Top 20 Extra by 10,000 Maniacs, an American band who couldn't find success in America, so they went to England, where they were hailed as the next big thing. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Casey's Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem, and I'm all set to count down the 40 biggest hits on the pop chart. Our rankings come from the official survey of radio stations from coast to coast. The survey is conducted by Radio and Records, the industry's #1 newspaper. Well, we have two big debuts this week, brand new hits from Belle Biv DeVoe and the group 10,000 Maniacs. Let the countdown begin. Number 40. The first of our two debuts is the first top 40 hit for a veteran alternative rock band called 10,000 Maniacs. The song's titled These Are Days. Casey's Top 40. I'm Casey, counting them down on Casey's Top 40, and we won't stop till we reach the top. Number 28. Rising 3 notches is 10,000 Maniacs, a band that once actually tried living up to its name. That was back when they had a maniacal sax player who showed up on stage wearing pink slippers and a spaghetti colander on his head. These days, the sax player is long gone, and the band's toned down a bit. Here's 10,000 Maniacs with These Are Days. Casey's Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem on Casey's Top 40. Now we're up to the song These Are Days by a band that got its unusual name by mistake. It was back in the early 80s that the founders of this band from Jamestown, New York, were busy searching for a name. Like most new acts, they wanted something that would set them apart from the crowd. They considered names like Still Life and Burn Victims, but nothing seemed just right. Then, after rejecting many possibilities, one of the guitarists suggested a name he remembered from a low-budget horror film he'd seen years before. As far as he remembered, the film he'd seen late one night was called 10,000 Maniacs. Well, the other members loved the name. It was so weird they knew it would make them stand out. So that's the name they chose. For years, they proudly performed as 10,000 Maniacs. And then late one night, in the middle of a club tour, one of the band's members was sitting in the hotel room winding down. He flipped on the TV, and there was a grainy, weird, low-budget horror film from the 50s. It was a film about a ray from outer space that created thousands of zombies who roamed the streets. And as he watched, he realized it was the very same film the group had taken their name from. But when the commercials came on, that band member found out to his horror that his group had created 8,000 maniacs who didn't exist. You see, the film wasn't called 10,000 Maniacs, it was called 2,000 Maniacs. Well, no matter how many maniacs there are in this band, the result is the same. Casey's Top 40. Sliding 13 notches to number 39, here are Natalie Merchant, Jerome Augustiniak, Rob Buck, Stephen Gustafson, and Dennis Drew. They're the band 10,000 Maniacs. Casey's biggest hits. A year ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was Because the Night, by a woman who says the worst thing about refusing to wear animal products is having to wear plastic shoes in winter. Natalie Merchant of the band 10,000 Maniacs is a highly outspoken vegetarian and animal rights activist. For years, she's campaigned against cruelty to animals, and in her personal life, she tries to wear no animal products. She says that works for her most of the time, but she's sorely tempted when winter settles in back on the East Coast. Natalie says that try as she might wearing plastic shoes, her feet never seem to get warm, no matter how many socks she wears. But for her, it's a small price to pay to be true to her beliefs. A year ago this week, this committed activist had one of the biggest hits in the USA. Here's Natalie Merchant and her band 10,000 Maniacs with Because the Night.
Take me now. Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem on a special edition of Casey's Top 40. Today we're counting down the top 100 hits of 1994.
Number 68.
Now here's the song that may be the last hit ever by 10,000 Maniacs. You see, shortly after they recorded it on MTV Unplugged, the group broke up. This is Because the Night.
Take me now, baby, here as I am.
Casey's Top
Casey Kasem. These are the hits you're buying and radio stations are playing from coast to coast. And climbing 4 notches to number 34 on Casey's Top 40, here's Natalie Merchant. She says that after she left the group 10,000 Maniacs, she bought a new house and began looking for new people to work with. Quote, I envisioned a small band of young musicians that would be interested in devoting a year of their lives to an experiment, unquote. Well, Natalie found her musicians, and now they're backing her on her first solo hit. This is Natalie Merchant with Carnival.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. Well, now we're up to the song Carnival. It's by a singer who used to go on stage in an outfit you might find at a carnival. She'd wear pink bedroom slippers on her feet and a spaghetti strainer on her head. It all happened back in the early 80s when Natalie Merchant was first getting started as lead singer for the band 10,000 Maniacs. Those were the days between the end of the disco era and the beginning of the British New Wave. It was a time when many bands tried to stand out by dressing in the weirdest things. Some bands dressed like pirates or wore skin-tight glitter suits. The members of the group called Devo wore hats that looked like electric lamps as they walked around the stage like robots. In the midst of all this weirdness, Natalie Merchant and 10,000 Maniacs tried to make their mark. And in the process, they went through a lot of maniacal ideas, like playing entire shows in the mind-numbing flash of wild-colored psychedelic strobe lights while wearing strange day-glow clothing. When that wasn't strange enough, they came up with another bizarre idea. They began appearing on stage in pink bedroom slippers, and on their heads they wore big, shiny aluminum spaghetti strainers. Natalie says the slippers were pretty comfy. The soft soles allowed her to slide around on the stage. But the spaghetti strainer, that was something else. It was very hard to keep on her head, so she tied it on with some string. But because the strainer was heavy, she had to tie it on tight, which started to leave small circles on her skull. In time, Natalie and the 10,000 Maniacs gave up trying to dress like maniacs, and these days she dresses like regular folks, which works far better for her, because people pay more attention to her music and less attention to her look. This week, a prime example of her music moves up from number 22 to number 19 on Casey's Top 40. Here's Natalie Merchant and Carnival.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. Casey's Top 40 originates in Hollywood. Moving up a notch to number 8 is Natalie Merchant, a singer-songwriter who likes to live the natural life. She's a strict vegetarian, and she loves to spend as much time as she can tending the garden at her huge house in rural upstate New York.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. Well, now we're up to Natalie Merchant, a singer-songwriter who says she'd like to someday write songs about her private dreams she's been collecting in a scrapbook for 15 years. Over the years, Natalie Merchant has tackled many of the problems of the world in her songs. Problems like teenage pregnancy, illiteracy, and water pollution. But recently, Natalie said she'd like to get more personal in her songs, to write about her private dreams. Natalie's been writing down her nighttime dreams for 15 years since she was 17. She keeps a notebook at her bedside, and whenever she wakes up from a particularly vivid dream, she writes down everything she can remember about it, describing all the images she saw while she was asleep. And she doesn't just use words. Sometimes she also draws pictures. Natalie says someday she'd like to record an album based on her dreams, a whole album of stream of consciousness songs that don't necessarily have a beginning or an end. This week, a more down-to-earth song Natalie wrote is survey song number 6 on Casey's Top 40. It's a song about a woman's reactions to the world she sees walking along a city street, what the woman calls a spectacle of wealth and poverty.
Casey's Top 40.
And falling 2 notches to number 18 is Natalie Merchant, a singer-songwriter who says the best part about being a musician is performing live. She says, quote, to make someone feel good with music or to make them cry, to get 4,000 people in a room having a great time with nobody getting hurt, that's not a bad job, unquote.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. Well, now we're up to the current hit for Natalie Merchant, a singer and songwriter who says she plans to retire from music one day and become an herbologist. 32-year-old Natalie Merchant is a woman with a lot of interests. She collects artifacts from the Great Depression of the 1930s. She's writing a book for children. And of course, she's a very successful musician. But Natalie says her real passion can be found not on stage, but out in her garden. Natalie is a big believer in the healing power of herbs, and at her house in rural upstate New York, she's planted a huge herb garden where she collects and grows hundreds of herbs from around the world. To help her understand them, she's bought dozens of books on herbs, books she keeps in her home library. Natalie says she's a big supporter of alternative medicine, and she's seen herbs perform some very impressive cures. Natalie says when she eventually retires from music someday, she wants to become a professional herb expert, an herbologist. She wants to study herbs full-time and says she might even put out her own line of herbal cures based on her knowledge and first-hand experience. Until then, Natalie will tend the herb garden at her upstate New York home, and she'll continue to make music. Music like the song that's at number 33 this week on Casey's Top 40. Here's Natalie Merchant and Wonder.
Casey's Top 40.
And rising back up a notch to number 12 on Casey's Top 40 is a woman who wrote songs for her band 10,000 Maniacs before going out on her own and writing songs for herself as a solo artist. This is Natalie Merchant and a song she wrote called Jealousy.
Jealousy.
Casey's Top 40.
And falling 3 notches to number 35 on Casey's Top 40 is Natalie Merchant. She recently took some time off to go canoeing in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. And she says it was a great way to clear her head and decompress after a long summer of touring.
Casey's biggest hits.
A year ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was by a committed vegetarian who says it's often so hard to find meatless meals while she's on tour, she takes her own food with her. This singer from Jamestown, New York, says she's been a vegetarian since she was in her teens. She says when she's at home, it's easy to avoid meat. She does most of her own cooking. But on the road, she's found that the only alternative many restaurants offer is a green salad and a baked potato. Not really interesting chow. So she makes the point of hitting the market every couple of days. She picks up enough fruits and vegetables to keep her going, and she carries them with her in a mini fridge on her touring bus. Her performing contract also demands that she be supplied with backstage treats like veggie burgers, a little something to eat before going out to sing songs like one of the biggest hits in the USA a year ago this week. Here's Natalie Merchant with Jealousy.
American Top 20.
I'm Casey Kasem. Well, now we're up to an American Top 20 extra by 10,000 Maniacs, an American band that couldn't find success in the USA, so they went to England, where they were hailed as the next big thing. The band began life in Jamestown, New York in 1981, where they put out EPs and albums on their own label called Christian Burial Records. The records didn't sell very well in the U.S., but they sold very well in England. Critics in Britain called 10,000 Maniacs one of the best of the new wave of post-punk bands. And so, from 1983 to 1985, the band spent more time in the UK than in the US. Guitar player Robert Buck says, quote, "We were in England for so long, we began to sound English, dress English, and act English. We hired an English manager. We recorded our first big album in London, the album called The Wishing Chair. Eventually, they returned to the States and found fame here in the U.S. as well. Now, with an American Top 20 Extra, here's 10,000 Maniacs with their big hit from 1993, Because the Night."
Take me now.
And the countdown rolls on.